Welcome, folks, to this week's Tech Sales Advice, the pre-sales show for pre-sales leaders and pre-sales professionals. This is a live program, and as I like to say, by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. This week and for today's session, we actually have a very special program. I've actually got two guests lined up this week. They're backstage right now, and we're going to invite them in one at a time. Mr. Amin Ibrahim is the Senior Director of Value and Solutions with Hootsuite. We're going to invite him in first and have a chat about some of the challenges facing pre-sales leaders. And then Marjorie Abdelkrime is a pre-sales collective ambassador, and she's going to be joining us to talk about pre-sales leadership as well. Now, this is the first week of this new format, if you will. So I'm excited to see how it goes. I'm eager to get the feedback from the folks who may be joining. And without further ado, let's invite our first guest, Mr. Amin Ibrahim. And there he is. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, Chris. How are you doing? Thank you for inviting me on your show.
I am so well, and I'm really excited to speak with you and Marjorie. You know, I said this in the post that I made that, you know, two of the more impressive pre-sales leaders, strike that, two of the more impressive people that I've had the pleasure of speaking to in recent memory. And you both inspire me in many ways. And I'm very confident that you're going to say some inspiring words for some of our guests. So delighted to have you. Now, I just took a minute and introduced you, but that was a very brief introduction. Do you mind taking another minute and introducing yourself a little bit more broadly?
You bet. Yeah, happy to. Again, thank you for inviting me, Chris. A pleasure to be here. So who am I? Who is Amin? I'm somebody who literally I didn't know this role existed when I was in university. I didn't know this role existed the first 5-6 years of my career. Beyond that, I actually come from a very different background from most pre-sales leaders. I studied marketing and international business in school, and then I actually, when I joined my first company, it was on the customer success side. So I was a business analyst, a project manager, client manager, working a lot with customers. And I remember the VP of sales one day tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, we're gonna have our very first solution architect at this company. We'd love for you to interview for this role. I think it'd be great." And I was like, "Tell me more." The more I found out about this role, the more I fell in love with it. As my good friend and actually boss Colin Fenn likes to say, like, this is the best part of sales. It's like, if you think about a movie, we're in like all the car chase scenes, the action scenes, all the fun stuff. We get to be involved in what I truly believe are the most exciting parts of the sales process. So it's a ton of fun. So joined Hootsuite, had a great time there, was really passionate about leadership, and been there almost 8 years, and here I am. It's been great.
Wow. What
best career nobody's ever heard of.
I'm telling you. Well, and your analogy is such a good one. I've never heard it put quite that way, but you're right. Like, we're the fun part of movies, right? The car chases and, the fist fights, if you're into that kind of thing, right? Or the love scene. I mean, the fun parts of the movie, that's the part of the sales process.
No cold calling, no hounding people to get paperwork in.
Yeah.
All those things that sellers are fantastic at. And that's why we have them. They're so good at that. But that's not everybody. Yeah. And this way we can be highly involved in the sales process, have a great time doing it, and do what we do really well, and let them do what they do really well. And what we do really well happens to be, the car chase scenes and the love scenes and the fight scenes, which is always fun.
That is so, I'm telling you, that little clip right there may be replayed a time or two. I absolutely love that. Now, I'm inspired by your role, the specific job title that you have, Senior Director of Value and Solutions. My guess is that's not by accident. Do you mind taking a minute and talking a little bit more about your specific role and this notion that value is actually part of your role?
Absolutely. So as the Senior Director of Value and Solutions for Hootsuite, I'm responsible for all the value and solution stuff that happens in the Americas and APAC. When we say value and solutions, it is under that umbrella. We have our solutions consultants, who are your typical pre-sales people, and we also have our business value consulting arm of the business. Right, they're the ones who will help people out a lot in terms of things like ROI and workshops and maturity assessments and all those great things that help customers get to the next level. At Hootsuite, we really pride ourselves on that great partnership approach and helping people not just execute really well, but to be able to put the right strategies in place and grow in the right way. And that team is very, very integral to that. And so naturally in the world of pre-sales is where people like that belong. And having them be able to work really closely with solutions consultants, it raises everyone's level, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm curious, do you find that a lot of your solution consultants aspire to become value engineers, or do you find that they tend to just be wired differently enough that they tend to sort of stay on one side or the other?
So it's definitely the latter. They are wired differently. When we first started this experiment many years ago, we had the vision of having, in general, our solutions consultants doing a lot more of that value type stuff. And in the same way that salespeople have a different skill set from pre-sales people, your typical pre-sales person has a slightly different skill set than your typical value consultant.
Yeah.
Right? Like some people get a lot more excited by, ROI models, for example. Some people really love to get out there and give a great pitch. And some people really love technology. Some people really love to whiteboard. And by having people focus on those things that they love the most and not do the things that they don't love as much, everyone wins. We win as a company, we win as individuals, and the customers win. So it's a great triple win.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, and I don't want to go too much further down this path because I know there's a number of things we're going to talk about, but I'm particularly interested in a typical sales process. Do your value engineers tend to be brought in at very specific points in the process, and then the solution engineers either come after, come before? Is it or is it just very dynamic, just depending on the customer and the situation?
It's very dynamic depending on the customer, the situation, the type of sales motion. Is this somebody who is a brand new net new customer? Is this somebody that is looking to expand and grow? So sometimes business value comes in first, sometimes pre-sales comes in first. Totally depends.
Yeah. Interesting. We could probably spend another hour just talking about that. I find that very interesting, but I know there's some other important topics we want to get to. Incidentally, let me just push our own pause button, folks. I want to welcome any of you who may have joined us. I'm speaking with Amin Ibrahim, Senior Director of Value and Solutions with Hootsuite. We're going to be inviting Marjorie Abdelkrime. I knew I was going to get tripped up for a moment. We're going to be inviting Marjorie Abdelkrime to join us here in just a moment. She's an ambassador with the Presales Collective. I see we have one person already sharing a comment. If you have any questions for Amin or myself or Marjorie when she joins us, please feel free to chime in. Or if you're there and you just want to say hello, please do. The topic for today is pre-sales leadership, some of the challenges that pre-sales leaders are facing. There's a lot of talk about the shortage of talent and sort of the war for talent. Let's begin by talking a little bit about some of the challenges, some of the recruiting challenges, some of the retention challenges that you're seeing as a pre-sales leader yourself.
Yeah, it sounds great. And I think in general, in the career market in general, in tech even more so, and then in pre-sales specifically even more so, it's a very interesting talent market, right? Everybody's heard of the Great Resignation.
Yep.
Right. The pandemic has put a lot of things into perspective for a lot of people. Geography doesn't matter as much as it did before. And on top of that, we've got a world where pre-sales it's fascinating, right? Because for a long time, pre-sales was this very, very niche role that few people knew about. And it's becoming more and more and more prevalent. And as it's becoming more and more prevalent, more companies are seeing the need for pre-sales. And companies before that might have had no solutions consultant or one solutions consultant are now seeing the value you have by adding teams of pre-sales people. And as a result, I think there was a great study done by the Presales Collective that was showing that for every 8 open roles, there's 7 people existing in seed as pre-sales people that can fill it. So there's a huge demand for pre-sales people, and as a result, people are getting recruited left and right. We all know LinkedIn's been great for that, and what it's really doing is it's really forcing everybody to look outside of the normal talent pools, which I think is actually fantastic for our profession. Right, and we could be a lot more creative with that, which is really cool. But it takes longer to get people enroll these days, and there's just more intense competition for the people that are out there.
Yeah. And what are you doing, or what are you encouraging your people, your managers to do in terms of a retention, either strategy or plan? And are you doing specific things, specifically for retention?
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to. It's crucial, right? Like in general, you hire top talent. They do amazing work for you. You do amazing work with them. And the longer you keep that partnership going, the better everyone else is, individuals, company, all that stuff. And so one of the things that we need to keep doing more and more and more of is, in this day and age, people need to be seeing constant growth, right? And so we need to have well-defined career paths with great line of sight on how you get there. We need to have a very deliberate way to make sure that knowledge is being shared and that enablement's happening and that people are building up their skills. The second people stop learning, they get bored, right? We've got to make sure that they're always learning so that they stay interested, they stay engaged. And the other thing as well that's really important in this day and age, with the way the world is right now, and some people are going into offices, some people are not going into offices, some people might go in once a week, some people might go in once a month. And in this virtual world, the nature of this communication, you've got to have an extra focus on how you communicate with your people. It is very, very easy for people in this day and age, when they are working from home full time, to lose track on the impact that they're having and the value that they're having. The second you lose track, and it happens to all of us, happens to me, I'm sure it happens to you, right? But when you lose track of the impact that you're having, it can almost make you like a little bit restless. I'm not providing value here. I could be doing more, all this other stuff. And people lose track of that because like in this day and age, you do like a great piece of work and you get like a Slack thumbs up message, right? Whereas in the office, it'd be high fives and you'd see the results on people's faces and you get that constant feedback because people need to feel valued, right? And so we've got to be extra deliberate in that communication with people, remind them of the great work that they're doing, highlight the great work that they're doing, and show them extra love. It's like some of the single most important meetings you can have every week are your one-on-ones with your people. And if you're in a position where you find that those one-on-ones are getting pushed because you're being pulled into pipeline calls or being pulled into other stuff, I'd actually recommend you take a step back and reassess, because those discussions with people, to remind them of the value that they're having, to give them that feeling of safety, and also keep your ear close to the ground and see what's happening in the organization, is so crucial no matter what level of leadership you're at.
Yeah.
And if you're not getting that from your leaders, I recommend that you push them to get that from your leaders, because it's really important and it benefits everybody.
I have to say, I mean, those words are so powerful. And, a few thoughts come to mind as you were speaking. First of all, I agree 100%. I think people are fundamentally driven to make a contribution.
Yeah.
And I think above and beyond the financial gains, we want to believe that we're making a difference. And to your point, in this virtual world, it's much harder to see, to physically and visibly see the impact that we're making. Yeah. And what I hear you saying, and it's so true, is that as leaders, we need to make sure we're not overlooking that. We need to make sure that we're going that extra mile to provide that feedback and give them that insight, that I don't want to say the attaboy, but it's bigger than that, right? To let them know that you are making a significant difference,
Yeah.
and let them know that their efforts sort of aren't being going unnoticed, right? So I mean, it's such a powerful reminder. Incidentally, I don't know if you can see the notes popping up, but our friend Greg Holmes has joined us, and it occurred to me I wasn't wearing my reading glasses, so I actually need to put my reading glasses in. Do you find pre-sales has a privileged position versus other technical roles, and so the danger could be you take too many people from other key departments? Great question, Greg. Amin, do you have an opinion on that?
First, great to see you, Greg, and thanks for the great question. Uh, it's fascinating, right? Because sometimes some of the best hires that you get are internal hires because they know the platform so well, they know the company so well, and they do awesome. So there can be a danger that you take too many people away from key roles or departments. But the one
Yeah.
thing I'd add is that it is very important not just to do internal hires. You've got to have that right balance of internal and external. If everybody's an internal hire, sometimes you can stay in a little bit of like a groupthink
Yeah.
situation. And like we all talk about diversity, and diversity of thought is so important in any team.
Yeah.
And yeah, it can happen. I would be very deliberate in making sure it doesn't happen.
Well, and the reverse is also true, though. I mean, one of my clients talks about how they keep hiring, talented folks, and the product team takes them, the product marketing team takes them, the professional services team,
Yep.
right? Because they're so good at what they do, and those types of skills
Yeah.
are required in other areas of the business. And this is another point that I want to make, and really question that I'll ask you is, a lot of people are talking about not only the increased in demand for talent because there's more jobs out there than people, but we are not, as pre-sales professionals, we are not only supporting and working with our sales counterparts anymore. We are working with customer success. We are working with professional services. We are working with product marketing. We are working with the product teams, right? Like, we sort of sit in the middle, and there's lots of departments that are looking for our insights, our advice, our help. Do you find that as well? And how do you help your team balance the demand just internally?
Yeah, so those are all great questions and great points. To the first one about internal hiring and people going to other departments, while it's always a shame to see people leave the world of pre-sales, when they go internally, like that's something to celebrate in such a big way.
That's a win. Well said.
Right?
Well said.
It's such a huge win, right? Like not only are they going to be doing great things in their departments, but they're also going to be helping the world of pre-sales, like extend
Exactly.
our influence into some of those other areas. Like some of the people that we've been able to partner with the best in other departments are former pre-sales people. Like we speak the same language, and so it makes it really, really easy for us to collaborate. And so it could be a really good thing. Now it's maybe not so much of a good thing if your entire team gets pillaged and goes to another department, but having team members join other areas of the business, always a big win.
Well, and by the way, I mean, this one client that I'm thinking of in particular, he said basically, I've become like the farm team of the rest of the company.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. Very good point.
Yeah. Yeah. And sorry, the second part of your question, can you please repeat that?
How do you help your team balance the demand from the different organizations, be it sales, marketing, product, customer success, et cetera?
Yeah, that's always a bit of a challenge. And what we find is that different people on the team naturally gravitate towards different areas. You're going to have some people, and interestingly enough, like some people, for example, who might have worked in customer success in the past, they naturally gravitate towards customer success and build really strong connections. Some people who are more sales minded, they gravitate towards sales and have really strong connections. Some people who are more technical minded, they gravitate towards the product side a bit more. And so a lot of these things happen organically, but when you take a step back and you're a bit deliberate with how you plan that out on the team, that can be really powerful too. Same thing with your leaders, right? Like if you have a bunch of different pre-sales leaders on your team, different people are going to gravitate towards those different areas. It's always good to encourage them. I know sometimes you could be like, oh, we don't necessarily have time to talk to these other departments.
Yeah.
That's something we got to make time for. It makes things so much easier for everybody else when people are aligned at the leadership level for everybody to get what they need to get done.
Incredibly well said. There's a few folks that we need to say hello to. Samuel West, good to hear from you. Great positive feedback drives constant improvement and drive. Well said, Samuel. Thanks for joining and tuning in.
On that
Christian.
topic, real quick, the positive feedback
please.
one.
Yeah.
If any of y'all are fans of strengths-based leadership, strengths finders, all that other fun stuff, Gallup created this survey, and it was this job satisfaction survey, 11 questions, and a lot of those questions I'm sure have made their ways into a lot of the type of surveys that you probably do within your companies. But one of the key questions that they had is, I have received positive feedback in the last week, yes or no?
Interesting.
And so in general, people who've received one piece of feedback and positive feedback in the last week are much happier in their jobs than people who have not. And it is important to keep reinforcing that, because everybody's working real hard. Everybody's doing a really good job.
Yeah.
And if we can find something specific that they did that was really awesome, why not highlight that?
Yeah.
There's a view that we shouldn't give too much good feedback to people. They're going to get a big head and all that other stuff. I don't subscribe to that view.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And you know what comes to mind for me, is two things. First of all, it's one of those things that's so simple, yet it is easy to overlook. And we forget that sometimes just the simplest words, simplest recognition can go such a long way. Yeah. The second thing, and you sort of alluded to this earlier, is that it goes up and down the chain, right? Yeah. As let's say, as a director or a manager, you have people below you, but we have to remember that the people in the middle, that they need that recognition and feedback as well. So
absolutely,
just the comments are starting to flow quickly. Christian looks like a German name. Hiring inside the company or outside, what works best for you? Christian, we're going to answer that question, particularly when we bring Marjorie in just a minute. We're going to double down on that question. Steve Klein chimed in, keeping the talent in the company is key, losing that versus losing the knowledge. Very well said. I don't see who this is from. I just see LinkedIn user, LinkedIn user. Another comment from Samuel. Indeed, well said, Samuel. And then Alvin Regas, love hearing the support. Absolutely, well said. And Alvin, nice to see you again. I want to touch on just a few more things before we invite Marjorie in. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about recruiting and looking in maybe, some of the places that we might not think to look to recruit. You mentioned some of the drivers for pre-sales professionals. You mentioned that, they need to be educated, they need to be recognized, they need to be challenged. For decades, I've believed that the pre-sales professional is a unique individual with lots of unique needs. Is there anything else that you would sort of put up there in terms of recognizing their needs, and as a manager, making sure that those are being met, in addition to some of the things that we've touched on?
Honestly, I think in general, we have a type as pre-sales people, but even within that type, everybody is so different. And you've got to treat everybody as like a complete individual. Some people care a lot about kudos. Some people care a lot about money. Some people care a lot about challenge. Some people care a lot about learning. Some people care a lot about status things like title or whichever. And you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach for your team. That's why it's so important to get to know everybody as an individual and find out what's important for them, so that we can make sure that they're as happy as they can be in their job. Because happy people stick around. Happy people do a great job, and it's the best way to be.
That's so well said. One of my favorite sayings is "people buy from people," and I'll turn that concept and apply it to the team. People follow people, and it's been said on the regular that people don't leave companies, they leave people. So your point is so incredibly well said. before we bring Marjorie back, I think the last thing I wanted, and you touched on this briefly, but one of the things that you and I chatted about maybe a week or two ago was the importance of working hard to build the team and to collaborate in the virtual world that many of us are still living in. Anything else that you wanted to touch on in terms of things that you have specifically done with your team and encouraged your managers to do with their team to help maintain that team feeling, that team spirit?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. That's a really tough one because it is a lot harder to collaborate virtually than it is in person. You completely lose the water cooler. Things that could have been a 5-minute conversation now have to be a half-hour one-on-one session. Everyone's calendars are completely jam-packed. And then we've also got all the different ways we have to communicate, whether it's email or Slack or Messenger or what have you. So for that, I mean, the team meetings obviously help in a big way, trying to plan as much as you can. In-person get-togethers help in a big way. Letting people know that they can always reach out to you when they need you helps in a big way. There's no one silver bullet to how we manage this. I think the really tough thing is getting that balance right. Like what is too many meetings? What is too few meetings? And again, knowing each individuals might help with that.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you ever do, or have you ever considered doing like office hours, like 1 or 2 hours a week where you open up you put it on everybody's calendar. You just open up a Zoom and you just say, hey, I'm quote in my office. Anyone can drop in at any time and just have a conversation. Have you experimented with anything like that?
We've done office hours in the past. I mean, sometimes it works well when they're very targeted for like, this is for this purpose or that purpose.
Yeah.
But what we found is that when people's calendars get busy, people just kind of stop showing up to the office hours.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating too, because like even when we have office hours in person, some people use it, but not a ton. It's the big thing for me, and we haven't cracked this code yet. And if anybody has cracked the code, I'd love to hear it in the comments room. But how do you recreate that feeling of people like sitting in like a pod together, right? Like a row of desks side by side, a group of like 6 to 8 people, joking, laughing, asking each other questions. How do we do that virtually? If anybody has an answer, I'd love to hear it because we haven't cracked that yet.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's interesting. I'll be speaking at DemoFest later this month. We're in May now, and we have a virtual booth set up for DemoFest, and I've not yet. I know a lot of people have done virtual booths. I've not yet done one, so I'm interested to see how that works out. So very good.
Let me know how it works. I'll be really curious to hear it.
I will indeed. I mean, you have been so gracious with your time so far, and I'd like to invite Marjorie in. Can I invite you to stay on stage with us for another half hour or so?
Absolutely,
and
happy
join
to.
in the conversation with Marjorie. By the way, I'm going to say something that may embarrass you a little bit, and I apologize in advance. But I have to say, I find your voice and your demeanor so soothing and comforting and refreshing. Just the way in which you speak and the way in which you carry yourself is just very, very, very pleasing. And I can't think of another word. So I really, really value your time and really appreciate you being here. So
thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that.
Well, you have a certain calming way about you, which frankly it's a very nice, sort of counterbalance to me with my loud mouth and, arm waving approach to things. So I rather enjoy that. With that said, I'm going to get her name correct. Marjorie Abdelkrime is going to join us. Marjorie, why don't you come on stage? There she is. How are you, Marjorie?
I'm definitely not the calm, soothing person either. So
you're going to even us out a little bit?
Yes.
Very good. Well, welcome. I know you're an ambassador with the Presales Collective. So do you want to just take a minute and talk a little bit about sort of the journey you've been on with Presales Collective? They've sort of exploded overnight. I know it's actually been a couple of years, but I think they have something like 20,000 members or something. So
Oh
do you
my
want to
gosh.
take a minute and talk about the Presales Collective?
Sure. Wow. So Presales Collective, I remember the first conversation I had was with James, probably in February 2020. We were looking at doing a potential webcast on a topic of the non-traditional journey of the SE, and it was just the beginning of the craziness of the pandemic just starting, and I guess everyone was just looking for that community, and their timing was just so right. The ability to build a strong, meaningful community that brought value to the profession and brought visibility to the profession right at a time where people needed it. And it just continued to grow from there. I had a role as a pre-sales leadership advisor as well for some time, got a chance to see what the team was doing there to help grow more of the footprint on driving leadership learnings and leadership engagement as well. And this year I'm taking an ambassador role and helping drive some of the different kind of visual or the engagement stuff with the community. So super excited to be a part of the community with James and Yuji and the rest of the team. They're all amazing. And if you're not part of the Presales Collective, do join. You'll learn a ton, you'll have fun. And now we're doing in-person stuff again. So you'll hopefully meet like-minded professionals, in your local areas as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think to a certain degree, I think a lot of us who have been in pre-sales for a long time, we're so hungry and so thirsty for an outlet and sort of to Amin's point, recognition and acknowledgement that this is a real profession and a real thing. And it's sort of, and so I think they sort of ignited this uprising of enthusiasm. And I think it's been just more overwhelming even than they could have possibly anticipated. So it's just been great to see, and to have leaders like yourself involved. It's just a super program. But by the way, Marjorie, I just have to interrupt just for a moment. So Seth Klein agrees with my comments about Amin exuding calmness and confidence. So I hope some of that rubs off on me a little bit. Marjorie, as you've heard backstage, Amin and I have been talking about some of the challenges facing pre-sales leaders. Frankly, I think I would go as far as to say, and I'm interested to see if you agree, I would go as far as to say, I think the biggest challenge, or the thing that most pre-sales leaders think about the most right now, is talent acquisition, talent retention. I see you're nodding your head, and I know you have a few thoughts. What are some of the things that come to mind for you immediately when you think about the challenge for talent in this industry?
We're recycling through the same talent pool, right? If we think about it, many of us are calling the same people over and over again. And like you said, people follow one another. So you'll see this trend of one person goes here and with them follows 10 or so people. And I will say that it's an opportunity for us to really start looking at that next generation of talent. And I know many of us are considering, college hire programs. I know, Salesforce has a great program. Juniper has an amazing program. ServiceNow, I've talked to some of their leaders. They do some amazing work
SAP
there.
has a great program.
Yeah, it's everywhere. They're all focused on new college hires, which is super exciting because I think you've been part of the NSSC conference on an annual basis, and you meet those kids and it's like, oh, so much energy and so many ideas, and they know what the SE job is. They walk into these conversations and they're doing their discovery and they're asking the great questions, which is fantastic. I love it. And I love that we're seeking out new talent, but there's another untapped pool that we're not looking at. And that's really going after underserved communities. And there's amazing programs going on right now that focus on bringing technical skill sets to these communities that most of the time these kids are not really even sure which path they should be going. They don't have mentors that give them that advice. They're not in an environment that provides them with the tools and the resources for them to really be thinking about a career. And these programs like Empower, IT Works, Europe, I mean, there's so many of them that are starting to pop up all over the place that are really focusing on building this professional skill set in a talent pool that traditionally we wouldn't have looked after. And, you know, I've been a mentor for students at Europe. I've done some work for IT Works. And those are some of the hungriest people I've met in my life in terms of ambition, wanting to learn new things, willing to take risks and go out and try, you know, new approaches and new techniques, and really are creative in the way that they come to you to solve problems. And that's a talent pool that as an SE profession, we're not going after. Actually, most companies outside of the IT pool, right, they're going to do some type of IT administration, they're not tapping them. And I think there's an opportunity for us as sellers. You know, we think about the car chasing that Amin was talking about earlier. These students, they're going to be at the front of that car chase. They're going to be the ones running after whatever ambulance they need to be running after, because they know that that's going to be an opportunity that not just gets them a career, but is truly family changing. It really helps them get out of the circular, unfortunate situation that they find themselves in, and helps really bring that economical benefit to them and to their families that's multi-generational. It's not just for them. It'll impact their parents, their grandparents, and their kids. So it goes back and it goes forward. So I think as a profession, we have such an opportunity to go after this talent pool that we don't have, that we don't traditionally go after.
And you mentioned a couple of organizations, and what I'm going to ask you for a list of some of those organizations that those of us in the opportunity to do something can start to leverage and connect with. And I'm inspired to ask you, because I think it's so interesting to hear how people like yourselves got into pre-sales to begin with. We heard Amin's story. He was customer success, and the company he was with decided they needed a sales engineer, and very astutely identified him as a good candidate, and the rest, as they say, is history. Marjorie, do you mind taking a minute, sharing a little bit of your story?
Yeah, so I'll go way back. Long ago.
Hey, Marjorie, hold on just for a second. I was hearing a robotic sound. I mean, were you hearing a robotic sound, or was that just me?
It's like robotic and underwater at the same time.
Is it better now or no?
No, I don't know if people online can hear that, but for us, it doesn't sound great.
Is this any better?
Yes, you're good now.
Yeah.
Okay. I just switched off of my mic, so it'll probably be a little bit muffled to my scarf.
That's quite okay.
Okay. So as I was saying that I was, you know, the joke's now gone, but I was going to say that I'm starting from a long time ago in a place far, far away.
Actually, that was perfect, because it sort of sounded like you were out in outer space. So actually, maybe that was timed and well planned. So.
Oh, gosh. So, you know, for me, why this is so important to me is really about, you know, who I am and where I came from as well, right? I think about, you know, my time as a young high school student and thinking about, you know, what colleges I'd go to and what that would look like and how would I pay for it, and, you know, where do I get the aid to be able to, you know, go through it and also help pay bills at home and whatnot. And you know, I decided to go to school. So I applied to school, and I was going to go into genetic engineering, believe it or not. And I hit, you know, organic chemistry, and it was like, you know, bulldozer that was like, yeah, no, sorry, this isn't the career for you. And I remember having a mentor who was like, you know, you're really good with languages. You speak many languages. You should try coding. Go into some kind of coding class. I'm not a developer. I also didn't like coding. It was the worst thing ever. I ended up dropping out of school. So I was like, you know what, college isn't for me. I'm going to go work and you know, bring some income into the household. Yeah. And I was doing accounts receivable at this office, and the lady, she's like, you're really good with computers. You should really go consider something in computers. It was big, you know, it was 2000, right? So .com era was just about to blow up, and everyone was like, oh, computers this, computers that. So I decided to go to school and did a 1-year program and went to go learn Novell and the basics of IT. And I landed a job in tech support. So that's where I first started to get my hands in the technical space. But follow on a couple of years later, I was doing where I used to work for Toys R Us as an exchange administrator, and I had a sales rep. Oh, I love salespeople. I had a sales rep. He was selling software to us, and he's like, you should really consider being a consultant. And I'm like, what's a consultant? I don't know what that is. And I worked in retail. We didn't pay for consulting services. We did everything ourselves, right? So he's like, you should be a consultant. So I went to, I interviewed for this job. I don't even know how I landed the job because the guy forgot that he had interviewed me. I had to call him a month and a half later. I was like, dude, you remember you offered me a job. I want this job. And I landed the role. So my first vendor side role was in professional services. So I did, we talk about the transferability of skills, right? PS support, customer success. Those are all transferable skill sets that we find that we rotate around in the SE world. But my first SE role was because the company I worked for decided they were no longer going to do services, as many software vendors do. And they reevaluate the P&L and the margin impacts of services to their bottom line. And they're like, let's do away with that. And they put me in an SE role. I always say that I went kicking and screaming. I wasn't happy moving into an SE role. And then 2 months later, not having to deal with escalations or broken implementations or whatever the case may be, my boss calls me and he's like, how do you like the job? I'm like, this is the best job ever. I don't have to deal with any problems. I sell, people are happy. People go out and have fun. It was great. So the rest is history. I've moved around between sales roles and professional services. And now I'm on the customer solution side. So customer success-ish type of role these days.
Yeah. Well, and what's so fascinating to me, I mean, there's a couple things about your story that really are inspiring to me. And, the fact that you went to college and you went, this is not me, right? You ran into one roadblock, you ran into another roadblock, you found yourself what sounds like a really good job in tech support. And, the one gentleman, he interviews you, and it sounds like it was a month and a half before he got back to you, and you had the courage and the follow through to call him up and say, hey, I want to do this, right?
Naiveness. I was still young, so I just call it naiveness.
You know what? I call it courage and intentionality is what I call it. And the fact that you were a professional, really you were in professional services, right? You were a consultant, and they said, well, actually, we're not doing that anymore, so you're going to do this. It's just, and so, I mean, to a certain degree, it's almost like you sort of fell into it and then realized that you sort of looked around and went, gee, this isn't so bad after all. Yeah. Now, was there, when you first learned about this new role, was there anything about it in particular that you were either reluctant to do or fearful of?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I came from the consulting world where, it either worked or it didn't work, right? There was no gray in between. And dealing with reps who were constantly like, don't tell them it doesn't work. And I'm like, that's not me. Like, if it doesn't work, they ask me and it doesn't work, I'm going to tell them it doesn't work. And that, I think, was my biggest learning process of how to handle those types of conversations in a more elegant manner, as opposed to the Jersey, no, it just doesn't work.
One of my favorite sayings, thou shalt not voluntarily confess thy sins. Exactly. So indeed. And when you moved into a leadership role, when you made that jump, what were some of the biggest adjustments that you had to make going from an individual contributor to now a leader of people?
Yeah, my first leadership role was when I was 28, so I was really young. In an industry where the professionals were more mature in their careers, right? And I had a person on my team who's probably in his late 50s. And at that point in time, he's like, I can't work for you. You're at the age of my granddaughter. So I think he was probably older than his late 50s. And, it was just, that was the biggest one for me, was gaining credibility as a young woman in a male dominated world was one of the challenges for me.
Yeah. What do you think gave you the maybe the courage, the confidence to navigate your way through that? And what were some of the things that you did to earn that credibility?
I'd say I got to credit a lot of my, just being so outspoken to just being from New Jersey. That's just how we are. Like we don't. I mean, it's the truth, right? Like what's on our mind gets said. You don't like it, that's too bad. I'm going to continue doing what I do. That's just our philosophy here, and in most people that I know, that's how we function and how we think. But how I gained credibility, it was more about having a lot of conversations with folks and understanding what is it that I can do to help solve for you. I've never wanted to claim that I had the same experience as some of the folks on my team. They, like I said, were fairly senior individuals in their roles. And I recognize that. Like, how can I be your voice in conversations that I can help mitigate, whether it be a promotion or, new training or a comp increase. And I think little by little, I demonstrated that I could have those discussions on their behalf and really be their advocates and not try to demonstrate that I was an expert over them, because I never was.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. Amin, I'm inspired to bring you into this part of the conversation. You strike me as a youngish man, although maybe you just look great for your age. Did you ever find your?
I think I just look great for my age.
You just look great for your age. Did you ever find yourself in a management position where maybe you had people, who were reporting to you that were older than you, and did you ever find that you felt like you had to build or establish your credibility?
So I actually haven't had that situation, and I think one of the key reasons is there hasn't been like nearly as big of an age gap. So there's nobody who I could be like their grandkid, which I think is a different thing. But also due to a lot of the profiles we hire and stuff like that, not necessarily too many like 20-year plus veterans either who'd be reporting to me. So actually, I haven't had that issue.
You haven't had that issue. Interesting.
I'd also add as well that, like, and maybe this is like looking too much into it, but guaranteed there's like there's probably like a little bit of subconscious bias that goes in there. So like I feel like an older individual like that,
interesting,
would probably bring some subconscious bias into that as to who he can and can't listen to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and Marjorie, I mean, I can feel that pain. I was about 29 or 30 when I got my first management role. Now this was, I was still in the IT team. So I was, running IT projects, and I had programmers reporting to me, but I had quite a few folks that were 10 plus years older than me. And I actually was a very young looking 30-year-old to boot. And that was a little intimidating, because you have to earn your stripes, and you have to build credibility. Amin, I'm inspired to invite you back to the conversation as well. I've asked Marjorie a few questions as you've heard some of her responses. Have any questions sort of percolated in your mind that you wanted to throw in Marjorie's direction, or anything that you wanted to add and build upon some of the things that she had mentioned?
Well, I gotta say, like, I'm really inspired by the message, because even when like we think that we're being really diverse and we're not hiring people who know how to code, we're really diverse, or we're not hiring people with old pre-sales experience, maybe we're really diverse, but we're not really, right? Like, we're still very much, as you mentioned, college degree driven, in general, white collar background driven. Like, how much great talent do we have out there that could be very different? Like, the thing is, everyone we hire from that background, like, we all speak a very similar language, right? You'll hear words like utilize and all those other, synergistic and the entire lingo. What happens when we bring in people who don't come from that background, who speak in a very, very real way, who have a completely different demeanor and quickly different manner? That could be such a great way to break the mold and break the formula and offer something new and different to our customers. I'm personally quite inspired by that, and I'm thinking, like, how can we take advantage of that? How can we find people who are like just supremely talented and very driven, and God knows where they're working now, but it's not white collar? How do we do that? That's the tough thing.
Well, so Marjorie, do you have some thoughts on his question? How do we do it?
Yeah, I think so. So like I said, there are a ton of programs that provide them with the basic technical skills, primarily in the infrastructure space, right? Less on the SaaS front. What many of them do, and actually what I did with several colleagues in the past, is that we would go and provide them training on specific technology for the company that we worked for, and they would get excited, and then they'd be like, "Hey, can you figure out how I can get a job as an SC?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't have a program that can get you the proper training," and there wasn't anything that would provide them the right support. I think there's an opportunity for us to take a look at these new grad programs and evolve them, right? And say, okay, how do I leverage this new grad programs, not just for this talent pool, but also veterans? I think that's another pool that we don't tap into as much and provide them this level of training, this like 6 month to a year to multi-year initiatives that give people the right skills on how to be an SE. So I think there's an opportunity for us to really go back to our HR leaders and say, what do we do to leverage these programs? Because these are young individuals who are coming out of training programs. They have the skill sets that we want. Leverage the funding that comes through this and then pump them through these training programs or academies or whatever we call them, right? And that's it. That's the big opportunity. The other one is providing them with internships. Again, internships are very college focused. And these kids, they all have to go through some form of internship before they get an official job. So my mentees that I had from Europe, they were all interns at some company, whether it be, I had an intern at eBay, one was at LinkedIn, one was at Google. And they're going through and learning, the processes behind these companies. And eventually their aim is to get hired at that company. How can we, through the different companies that we work at, create internships that will allow for these individuals to learn how to become an SE, be interested in the role, and then eventually go into these academy programs? So I think there's an opportunity there. We just need to get the people, that have the budgets around these programs, these academy programs, to recognize that the tier 1, tier 2 colleges that they all target is not the end all be all, especially as everyone's coming to me and saying, oh, we need to hire more Black and Hispanic, team members. How do we do that? Tier 1 colleges, we're not even targeting historically Black colleges, right? That's a big problem. That's another problem, right, on the college front, is that we're not even targeting HBCUs. How do we even open up that avenue to make sure that, again, people from different backgrounds are being given the opportunity to become an SE? So each one of us that are watching this, go back to your HR department. Hey, what are you doing? I know you do this for IT. How do I make sure that this is something that we can pull into our SE Academy programs?
Yeah. Such powerful words. And as you were speaking, the other thought that came to mind for me is we really do need to change the way we're thinking. We need to think broader. And I mean, to your point, I think we don't even realize that we're working within certain guardrails or certain boundaries when and we think we're being diverse, but within the boundary, right? with the typical guardrails, right? And we really need to think on a broader level. And in fact, Seth Klein mentioned, big fan for the veterans. It's even inspiring me to think about what can I do? How can I make my programs available, designed to introduce people to the pre-sales profession? How can I make those available to some of the individuals, the organizations that we're talking about? So that's actually something I'm going to look into as well. You've inspired me, Marjorie. You both have been so gracious with your time. I'm going to wrap things up in about 5 minutes here. But before we do, if I can indulge you both just for a minute, we're going to do a quick lightning round. Can I indulge you both for about 5 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay,
Sounds
great. So Amin, we'll start with you. I call this tech sales advice. As you reflect on your career, is there a piece of advice in particular that you got along the way that made a significant impact on you?
Piece of advice. One thing I learned very early is just you got to keep it simple. You've got to keep it simple, especially when I was younger. I would use bigger words. I thought that made me sound smarter. And the more detail I had in something, the more it looked like it was well thought out. But people lose attention so fast these days. You've got to keep it simple. You've got to keep it on message. And if you need to dive down you can, but keeping it simple has worked really well for me.
Really well said. As you said that, one of the thoughts that came to mind was a confused mind always says no.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. Love that. Marjorie, same question. Any piece of advice in particular that you got along your journey that has really stuck with you?
Yeah, be bold. And I always say this to the young women that I mentor specifically, right? They are always afraid to be bold. First thing I tell them is if you're not going to speak up for yourself, if you're not going to be outspoken, whether it be in a customer opportunity or for your own career development, no one's going to listen to you. No one's going to know because they're not mind readers. So be bold and be outspoken.
So well said. By the way, Rachel Jepson has chimed in. Rachel, thanks for the note and thanks for the comment. I agree. Amin and Marjorie have shared such great insights. All right, Marjorie, we'll take you first this time. You bump into someone who says, "Hey, Marjorie, I just saw you on LinkedIn Live the other day. I'm starting my first day as a pre-sales engineer. Any advice for me?"
Oh, learn. And that's not just a day one individual. That's a career-long initiative. You've got to be up to date on the technologies you sell. You got to be up to date on how your customers buy, why they care. So learning is a never-ending journey. My advice to anyone at any point in their career is to continue learning.
That is, I'm taking that one to the bank. The moment we stop learning, honestly, we may as well stop living. I mean, life, if there's anything I've learned, like every day is just a lesson, right? And multiple lessons. Very, very well said. Amin, how about you? Same individual turns around and says, "Oh my gosh, 2 in 1 day." Amin, any advice from you?
Yeah, but my advice would be care about the deal. Right. So don't just think about like, this is my piece. This is where it stops. I'm just here to do the disco, or I'm just here to do the demo. But to be really successful and build those really strong partnerships with sales, you should be talking about how we're going to take down this deal. What's going to make us win? What can I do? What can you do? That makes you a true partner and consultant to your seller, and not just a resource that they call in when they need, tech presentation X or tech presentation Y.
By the way, you followed your first piece of advice, which is to keep it simple, and you delivered one of the simplest but best pieces of advice I think we've heard. Care about the deal. You want to build your relationship and your partnership with sales. Care about the deal. Incredibly well said. All right, folks, we literally have time for one more. And I'm just going to put it out there because this is the question that usually catches people a little off guard. So I'll let either one of you raise your hand to take this one. If either one of you could ask me one question, what might it be?
What's the secret to your success?
What is the secret to my success? I am just naive enough to keep trying. And I sincerely think that that's it. I am just naive enough to, think that if I just keep trying, I might someday accomplish what I think it is that I'm trying to accomplish.
Some might call that grit and hustle.
It really is. I mean, I am, for better or for worse, I am one that does not rest on my laurels, and I'm drives my wife a little bit crazy, but I'm not sure I'm just ever satisfied. I just always want to continuously push myself to do more, do better, and I do things that I love doing, and like these LinkedIn Live. Somebody asked me one day, "Chris, what's the end game with these LinkedIn Live, conversations?" And I said, I've just had a great conversation with 2 inspiring individuals, and we've had, who knows, a handful of folks online learning and listening. That's the end game. And so that's it. I think I'm just naive enough to keep trying. So, but it's a good question because it made me ponder and think. Amin, thank you so much. Any closing words from you, sir, before we put a bow on today's conversation?
Closing words. Well, first, thank you for inviting me. I thought it was a great discussion. I had a lot of fun. I hope everybody else here had a lot of fun. I'm really thinking now about this, like this idea of guardrails around our diversity hiring practices, and how do we remove some of those guardrails? Like we still have on our JDs or like job requirements, it still says like college degree,
right?
And that's got me thinking. So that's my big takeaway.
Fantastic.
So thank you, Marjorie, for bringing that to the table.
Marjorie, any closing thoughts from you before we wrap it up?
You know, I always tell folks to push the boundaries, and with talent, I think that's an opportunity, like Amin just said, right, for us to rethink how we've done things for so long. Just because it's been done for the past whatever number of years doesn't mean that it's the right way to do it. And use me as an example. I mean, I don't have a college degree, and you know, I consider myself a successful individual. And if I can do it, I think anyone can. And it just takes a matter of someone opening that door for them, to give them that first opportunity. That's all they need, is that first opportunity to be able to walk through it, and they're going to run forward.
Such powerful words. And Marjorie, I'm going to suggest that you're very much a success and have been a delight to have on the show. Folks, thank you so much for joining. Any of those of you who are still with us, thanks so much. We had lots of comments and questions. For those of you who may have caught us in the recording, I encourage you to reach out to Marjorie and Amin and connect with them if you're not already. I encourage you to follow #TechSalesAdvice if you want to see more of these. And I encourage you to go to demodoctor.com to check out some of the training we have available there. And of course, you can go to techsalesadvisors.com. Marjorie and Amin, thank you so much. Hang around for just a minute because I'm going to give you guys your parting gifts. Everyone else, thanks so much. We'll see you next week on Tech Sales Advice. Bye all.